First, it was Prince Edward Island, then more recently, Brampton, Ontario. I speak of protests staged by Indian international students demanding work permit extensions and permanent residency in Canada. Among other demands, these protesters are requesting a 5-year postgraduate work permit for all international students. Indeed, the protesters seem to be playing the victim card, wanting to change the rules so they can get permanent residency status in Canada, easy peasy, which is ultimately the pathway to full citizenship. But what's really going on? Is our immigration system being gamed? Is official multiculturalism broken? Well, with the answers to these questions and more is my guest, Ted Smith. Now, Ted Smith is not his real name, of course. We've disguised his identity and given him a different name for personal safety reasons, but he is from the Indian community and he knows who's who in the zoo, and he has a very good idea as to what's what in terms of what's really going on. So welcome, Ted. Thank you for coming in. Tell me, what is really fueling these protests that we're seeing all across Canada right now?
There were very short-sighted policies implemented to address a so-called labor shortage, and that meant giving people a postgraduate work visa to work in certain industries. In a natural economy, wages would simply rise or businesses would get more efficient. But in this case, the government wanted to put a limit on people's wages by bringing in foreign workers. And the idea was that nobody really wanted to live in PEI or Manitoba, so let's attract people from the third world with a Canadian passport. So if you want to get a Canadian passport, all you had to do was to go to a strip mall college to say you got a Canadian education and then work at Tim Hortons for 6 months in PEI, and there you go, you have a passport. Incredibly short-sighted. This is like winning the lottery to a lot of people in the third world. It took me about 8 years to get my PR, and it's something that should be earned, not just given away, because when something is given away, it's not appreciated, it's not valued, and that's what we're seeing here. We've given them such a level of entitlement, and we also have politicians telling us that they are the future of this country. Mark Miller went in Parliament and said that they are being complimented while we Canadians are being gaslit. So, of course, they have this level of entitlement now that these pathways are closing. The reason why they're closing is because overnight, thousands and thousands of people showed up in Alberta, Manitoba, and PEI to abuse these loopholes. They even go on TikTok showing their road trips going back to Ontario and Brampton the minute they get their PR. So you really got to wonder about the lack of due diligence that has happened in our provincial capitals around these policies. Think about it for a second, Dave. These people could qualify for these jobs and then sponsor their dependents. In reality, our social safety nets, like the Canada Child Benefit Act, all these sorts of grants from the government for low-wage workers have turned into corporate subsidies for low-wage and low-skilled people. It's a complete mockery. We are subsidizing these corporations to hire these people.
And Ted, I want to go back to something you said, and it's very significant, I think, strip mall colleges. And, in the Department of Giving Credit where credit is due, the Globe and Mail a few months ago, had an incredible expose about the so-called strip mall colleges. And I believe, without putting words in your mouth, Ted, what you mean by that is that you can go to various cities and there's a college. It's advertised online and it looks like an Ivy League university, when in fact it's just some office space that might not even have any equipment in there, any students. It is a front, for lack of a better word. So is there a bit of deception going on here that these foreign students who are allegedly coming over here to learn, a good trade or to educate themselves, they're not learning anything at all. This is just a front to get in the door. Is that what's going on?
Well, who would travel halfway around the world to study hairdressing at a college right next to a Service Ontario and a Dollarama? That is the question we must ask. There's a very coordinated attempt right now from very powerful people within different Indian communities and politicians who are trying to paint these students as victims. It is interesting when the CBC does a story on mortgage fraud or driver license fraud. The people paying to commit fraud are seen as criminals. But it is not portrayed the same way when somebody is committing immigration fraud. Suddenly, these people are victims. They are not victims. They are just abusing loopholes that were left wide open. And you have to understand, a lot of these colleges were created by people from my background. I refuse to say the word community because the only community I belong to is the Canadian community, and we should not balkanize our country.
It's a good thing that you are originally from India and that you are an Indian, because you know how the left loves to play the racism card. If you were some white guy with a MAGA hat on, you'd be toast. So this is not a matter of anything being racism-driven whatsoever, is it?
I think everybody is a combination of left-wing and right-wing viewpoints. For example, in 2008, many people considered themselves left-wing during the Occupy Wall Street movement. The left was about economic justice, and that script got completely changed, and now we're fighting over things that don't matter. There's a reason why Trudeau is focused on all fringe sorts of groups instead of talking about the magical word middle class. He doesn't say that anymore. But yes, it is important that I, as somebody of Indian descent, speaks about this, because we suddenly have an unwritten rule in this country that if you are not from a particular ethnic group, you're not allowed to call out bad behavior. I would like to put an end to that.
There seems to me to be a almost an industry out there of immigration agents, immigration lawyers, however you want to call it, and basically they have a template set up so that if you want to come to Canada and you want to bend the rules, because, you know, when you are a temporary visitor, well, the word temporary means not forever. Well, here's how you go about gaming the system. Is this what we're seeing too, my friend?
We are seeing a match made in hell. Canadian politeness and desires to keep face and sweep things under the rug, combined with the pushiness and dog-eat-dog mentality that you see in India. It is a recipe for one group being taken advantage of by the other until somebody puts a stop to it. And this is why I'm speaking out. Immigration and all these cultural issues used to be a localized problem. Brampton, Surrey, Malton. Now it's Canada-wide. Suddenly, all those Liberal voters in Atlantic Canada get to experience what I've experienced my whole life. And I've always said, my whole life in Canada, mind you, I always took notice of the pandering going on because I knew it would reach a point where it would be a national problem, and we see it today. Mark Miller, the immigration minister, in his interview with the CBC, said that there were fake colleges giving out fake degrees in Brampton and Surrey.
Certainly, if you look at places in Surrey or Brampton and Mississauga, as well as elsewhere, you see degree-granting institutions that are giving fake business degrees, and basically people are working during the week, doing some work on the weekend, and then getting, perhaps a 3-year ability to work in Canada, and then hoping that they'll be able to stay here.
What is the common denominator between the two? Is it elevation? Sea level? The wind currents? Climate change? No, it is my own Indian people who have created all these colleges simply to take advantage of these loopholes. And Canada is a high-trust society. We are expected to do the honorable and the right thing, and India, in many parts of it, unfortunately, is a low-trust to no-trust society. So as long as there are no repercussions, the behavior will continue.
And Ted, I want to make it clear that I am personally not against immigration. However, I want qualified immigrants coming into the country. I want people who can contribute to Canada, not milk Canada. I mean, if you're reasonably minded, you have to have that thought, given that our birth rate is under 2, which means we can't sustain the population through the natural birth rate. But you told me something that was a little disturbing off camera, Ted, that when you look at so many of the people coming into Canada, for example, these aren't Indian lawyers, these aren't Indian doctors, Indian engineers that are coming here. They don't really think that highly of Canada. I can't say I blame them the way this prime minister has all but totally destroyed our relationship with your former country. Do I have that correct?
Well, if you look at Canada from the outside, it does look like a banana republic. There's a complete failure to do their job by the media and judicial system. There's a housing crisis, a doctor crisis, very low wages, and horrible weather. It is not really attractive to many people right now. And I would like to talk about your comment about the low birth rate. If we just got out of the way, if the planners and central planners in Ottawa simply got out of the way, things would fix themselves. You would have house prices coming down, making things a bit more affordable, allowing people to buy their first home and start families. Nobody is getting to the root cause of the issues. They keep coming up with solutions that don't really solve the problems, but result in more dependency on the state and more hopelessness amongst the populace. They are very successful politicians, I would say, but they are not good statesmen. And keep in mind, David, these people are the second highest paid MPs in the world. And this is how they treat us. The Minister of Small Business was asked about the higher capital gains tax, and when she was asked about how doctors did not like it and they might move, she just turned around and said, "We'll just speed up the recognition of foreign credentials." So we are not citizens here. We are just a bunch of farm animals on the tax farm to them.
There has been some pushback that this could affect family doctors and other professionals who incorporate their practice for the tax advantages that a corporation would have. So while individually, if they were, say, working, in a hospital, they would not necessarily be affected by the new capital gains inclusion. But if their corporate structure is such that they're relying on corporate investments to pay for their future and their retirement, they're going to be hit. And that in a country that's already struggling to have enough family doctors, this creates a disincentive for some of them to work in Canada.
We recognize that, but one of the things that we will continue to do is encourage foreign credential recognition to help we know that coming out of the pandemic, our healthcare has really been hampered and there's a really challenge with labor, but the investments we made with foreign credentialing, we've already made a significant investment in previous budgets, and in this year we've topped that up, and we will continue to invest to ensure we're encouraging bringing talent from other countries to get their credentials recognized, and that will also encourage them to get more jobs here and fill the desperate labor market needs that are required in our healthcare industry.
No, and I understand the impetus to try to accelerate health professionals in particular to be able to work in Canada through the standard. But if doctors who are here now, who are set up through the existing corporate structure that relies heavily on capital gains income for their retirement and for their future, because they wouldn't have a pension in this sort of a situation, if they balk at the situation that has been created by this change, I mean, how do you deal with that? The goal is to not increase the gap in medical coverage, right? So how do you respond to the concerns being raised by people in that sector that this is potentially punitive to them?
If I take a step back to what I mentioned earlier, and you heard the Prime Minister said it, what we're really trying to do is really create a Canada that is fair for every generation.
And certainly, Ted, even if I am pro-immigration, it's got to be in moderation. The levels of immigrants that this current federal Liberal government have brought in has been downright irresponsible, I think, not just in immigration, but illegal migrants coming in. Roxham Road is gone, but they're coming in almost every day in international airports in Canada. And it's a cascading effect, isn't it? Housing, for example. Where do we put these people, right? Well, certainly if you're an illegal migrant, if you're lucky enough, you get a 4-star hotel overlooking Niagara Falls, and I'm not making this up. I wish I was. But this has not been planned out. I mean, this whole idea of Justin Trudeau saying diversity is our strength and hashtag welcome to Canada. Well, how do you facilitate this influx of so many hundreds of thousands of new people?
It all comes down to how you see the world. A person like you or me look to solve problems and move on to solving the next problem. The people in Ottawa, that whole ecosystem of people, they do not see solutions as the end goal, but as bureaucracy as a solution to more bureaucracy. So the more hopelessness and the more poverty you import into Canada is a bigger opportunity for more funding for food banks, more funding for social services. You see food bank CEOs getting on TV and saying we need more funding. You're not going to say that in Scarborough the majority of people had just shown up in Canada in the past 12 months. No, because you are a food bank CEO and it's fantastic. You are wrapped up in this cloak of morality that you are serving hungry people, but you want job security. Speaking of job security, another industry that has popped up recently is the DEI industry. I personally know someone in my circle who is a DEI consultant. She's made so much money off of contracts that she has a summer home in Atlantic Canada and a winter home in the Bahamas. So the way they look at the world is non-stop bureaucracy. We serve the bureaucracy doesn't serve us.
Ted, let me ask you something else. Is there perhaps another unspoken strategy at play here? And by that I mean, is this all about the Liberals changing the demographics of Canada on the basis of never forget who let you into this country, right? All we ask in return is every 4 years you check red when you go to the ballot booth. I personally think that's what's going on in the United States under the Biden administration. The southern border has been a disaster. Millions of illegal aliens have come into the U.S. I think it's, again, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It was the Democrats that brought you in. Oh, and by the way, please move to a red state so that we can eventually switch it to a blue state and therefore never lose power. Could that be what's really at play here?
The strategy of appeasing groups through incentives and you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours is happening. And we see every political party falling over themselves on how to get the ethnic vote. Well, here's a strategy for anybody listening out there. How about you put Canada first? Believe it or not, there is a silent majority of brown and Asian and black people who are also fed up of what is happening here. We don't want community leaders who represent us. The only minority on the planet is the individual. We don't need Al Sharptons here. We don't need grifters making money off of supposedly representing us. And if you actually put policies in place that put Canadians first, that benefited all of us, and not at the expense of some other group in this country, you will get our vote. We did not speak up until now for 2 reasons. There are threats to our safety in Brampton. People have been killed over this issue. Journalists have been held at gunpoint in Brampton. And the worst thing that could happen is that Canadians who, until very recently, had a very good life, would just not care. You're too busy at the cottage, too busy playing golf, too busy going to Cancun for you to nudge yourself out of your comfort to actually put this country on its right track. But I don't think we're comfortable anymore, and that's why I'm speaking up now.
And Ted, I think you're bang on in terms of when we look out at immigrant communities, people from other countries that are now Canadians, the idea that they're gung-ho, I'm team illegal immigration, I'm team bring everybody over. No, because they, like you, yourself, you played by the rules, you got in line, you came here legally, you've got a nice business going now. why should you be the subsidizer of illegal migrants and other immigrants that do not have any skills? Same south of the border. If you look at Latinos there, one might think they would support the idea of an open border between Mexico and the U.S. Nothing could be further from the truth. They've worked so damn hard to get their piece of the American dream that to see people that we don't even know who they are come in, it's a violation. So maybe if a politician took a tough stance along these lines, they would indeed have popular support. What say you?
We see a lot of instances of empathy and altruism being weaponized against the Canadian populace. It is important to care for people, but to do it in such a way that you don't find yourself in dire straits. When somebody is drowning, you don't jump in if you can't swim. And right now we're all drowning together. This immigration system is simply the result of a government that is checked out. They are having a scorched earth policy before the next administration can come in and make it impossible for them to fix. Just think about the headlines we'll see 2 years from now. If there has to be a mass deportation of people, how will the Liberals spin this? Right now, there are 200,000 people in Canada on student visas who have not attended class. They did not even have to provide a police background check. The Immigration Minister, Mark Miller, claimed they submitted biometrics. These are simply fingerprints. These are not background checks. We have criminals who abuse this.
The reality is that on every student that comes through the student streams, other than the U.S., we do biometrics. Those biometrics go through a database, and we check. We do take a risk profile of the people that we ask or that come to this country, like any temporary resident.
We have a very disgusting person in PEI, Gordon McNeely, who is sympathizing with the protesters in PEI and connecting their ridiculous demands to George Floyd and saying that this is a struggle of colored people.
I was on a Zoom call, a national Zoom call across the country because tomorrow is George Floyd's anniversary of George Floyd's death. It's been 4 years. We sat on these grounds and ran a petition, did different things. On that call, when I had a chance to speak to national leaders of color, I said that this is what we're going through right now. And it was interesting to see, because you can't see people on Zoom, but you saw what the reactions were and what the leaders across Canada were thinking about what was happening here. So we talk about it with race. We talk about it. It's affecting racialized people. I don't think the decision is racist, but it's affecting racialized people, which anybody can make an assumption, but it's affecting you, and it's not easy being racialized. And I want to make sure that you understand that and realize that I see you and I understand you and I know you, and I will fight for not even equality, equity. This is so unequitable, this decision, and I stand by you.
You are disgusting, Gordon McNeely, absolutely disgusting, to try to destroy the harmony between all the races and cultures that make Canada home. We are not some foreign country where people didn't get along. This country was beautiful, it is beautiful, and it'll be better once we put people like you out of power.
And do we also have to have a long, hard look at state-sanctioned official multiculturalism, which is to say, I even see people on the left going back to post-October 7th, what happened in Israel, and then almost just days later, people going to the streets of our great Dominion, openly chanting for genocide. And many of these people, they're not even Canadian citizens. They're foreign students. They're here on visas. And maybe if you don't, because I think there was always an unwritten deal in terms of multiculturalism. You come to our country, but you leave your hateful baggage behind. You join the team, come into a quasi-melting pot. But what we've seen these last 7 or 8 months it's been downright disturbing. And I know multiculturalism, it's a sacred cow, like state-funded healthcare. But you have to ask yourself, is it working?
You've asked a very pertinent question. And this highlights a Canadian custom that needs to come to an end if we are actually going to have these types of conversations. This idea that Canadians say something but mean something else. Because when somebody in Canada says multiculturalism, people might think of different types of food, like Vietnamese pho, or Indian curry, or Jamaican food, things like that. But to someone from overseas, they hear the word multiculturalism and they think that they do not have to integrate one bit and they can bring all their foreign conflicts here. Another way to look at this is if you attend a citizenship ceremony now, which I have attended for a dear friend, the citizenship judge did not say anything about integrating into Canada, keeping your conflicts back home. The beautiful thing about being in Canada, Dave, is that we are actually physically far from so many of these battlefields, that I've seen friendships that can only happen in Canada between a Jew and a Palestinian. Can you believe that? That would never happen elsewhere. And yes, they're a little divided over what's happening now, but they're still friends because they're Canadian to each other. But the judge at the citizenship ceremony emphasized decolonization. That means getting rid of everything that this country was built on. And that shouldn't be the case. This is why you see a complete lack of respect for everything here in Canada.
You know, Ted, I'll tell you, it breaks my heart every time I see a municipality tearing down a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, our founding prime minister. Yes, he was a flawed man, but show me any great man, any great woman, I will show you a flawed individual as well. And I don't think the answer is to tear down statues, to put them in coffins, such as the Sir John statue at Queen's Park. But such is the case right now. You know, we could talk about this till the cows come home, but one last thing I want to touch upon. If you were running for office and you wanted to make new rules, make new changes, new regulations, new laws, what would you do?
First of all, I would invite everybody to see themselves as Canadians. Canada is probably the biggest country in the world in terms of percentage of the population that are physically here, but mentally somewhere else. Believe it or not, we actually need each other. We do. We don't. I depend on you and you depend on me to wake up in the morning and contribute to society in our own unique ways. So, first of all, let's start to see this place as our own and stop trying to tear down what was built over here. Let's build upon it and let's ask people to be loyal to Canada.
Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for having the bravery to speak out. As I mentioned at the offset, the reason why we've given you a false name and we've distorted your appearance is that there are nefarious types that just do not like you calling it as it is. So I appreciate that. And I want to thank you too, my colleague Lincoln Jay, when he covered the PEI protest. You are an invaluable source of information for him. And you're welcome anytime back. Thank you so much, Ted. Folks, where do we begin when it comes to checking off all the Justin Trudeau Liberal disasters? And one of the more recent ones is certainly the immigration file. Immigration is out of control in this country. Let's send a message to the Trudeau Liberals. Please go to our newest petition, netzeroimmigration.com. That's netzeroimmigration.com. Tell the government to get its house in order. And by the way, while you're there, folks, if you're able to, kindly make a donation so that Rebel News can continue to bring you the other side of the story.